Governor Ron DeSantis signed an election reform bill he championed into law this past week, and he did so in West Palm Beach, not far from Mar-a-Lago and his political mentor. But no reporters were allowed, save the Fox News crew that carried it live.
Governor, it was on national TV. It wasn't secret.
Why is this a good? Well, tell us. We couldn't get inside. We were out there in the parking lot.
The governor took no questions, but supporters and opponents weighed in on the signing.
We saw across the country various things that happened, and although we had a successful election in Florida, there were things that we want to make sure don't happen.
This type of bill that's almost a follow along with other states like Georgia is really going to suppress the vote, especially in low-income minority areas.
Now for our roundtable with our News Channel 5 political analyst, Mariana Mancuso and Brian Crowley. First to the controversy, and then we'll get into the meat of election reform. Brian, only Fox News is allowed to be there for the signing. First Amendment experts are now weighing in, saying it was possibly illegal. That's being debated. What's going on here?
No, the governor was being childish. This is legislation that will affect over 14.5 million voters in Florida, a third of whom are Republicans, a third of whom are Democrats, and another third are independents. This affects everybody. And if you really believe in this legislation and you really believe it's helpful to all of those voters, then you should talk to all of them. And you shouldn't be locking out Florida media. You shouldn't be locking out other citizens who might want to participate or watch. He turned this into a political event for something that was just totally unnecessary to do.
Mariana?
Absolutely. And I think that it's important that we remind the viewers that one of the biggest things that people are questioning with this bill, regardless of the pomp and circumstance that he wanted to put around it and shroud himself in a ballroom, put it on national TV and help this kind of boost his name ID for his phantom 2024 race, is the fact that in the Constitution, under the 14th Amendment, it says that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States of America. That's exactly what he's doing with this law in Florida, and it's absolutely ridiculous, and it has to be retracted. This is disenfranchising millions of voters across the state. Lawsuits
are already being filed. The argument is the governor himself said his words months ago, we had a well-run 2020 election. It went smoothly. His critics have argued, then what needs fixing? Brian, his supporters say you can always tweak and make it better for all of us. Your take on the fundamentals of why election reform happened and about the debate over whether it was really necessary or not.
Well, this was not an attempt to make voting easier and safer. In fact, it makes voting harder. For example, somebody can't have more than 2 other ballots than their own to deliver to a limited access drop box. So nobody working in a nursing home can collect, 20 or 30 ballots from the residents of that nursing home and drop them off for them at the elections department. Instead, I guess all these people are supposed to hop into their wheelchairs and try to get to the elections office as easily as they can. I mean, none of this had anything to do with making elections easier. So it's silly for him to even proclaim that. Safer? Well, I doubt it. You can't have something that was nearly perfect in November and then suddenly say it needs fixing. It's either one or the other.
So bluntly, what did it have to do with in a sentence? Then we'll go to Mariana. Brian?
I'm sorry?
Bluntly, what did it have to do with them in your estimation? And then we'll go to Mariana for her take.
No, this had nothing to do with, look, the only reason he appeared on Fox and Friends to make this announcement, and even they didn't know he was going to turn it into a signing thing, as they said later. This was pandering to former President Trump and his supporters. That's all this was about. This was about Ron DeSantis setting himself up for his own political future.
Mariana, to the meat and text, and you pulled out your constitutional review there, but to the meat and text of why election reform happened, what ultimately drove it here and is driving it in other states?
This is the Republicans' way of trying to get back that they lost the White House. This is a public temper tantrum by the GOP, and they're actually effectively here in Florida. DeSantis is being Schrodinger's cat. In 2020 of November, he said we ran a smooth election. We should serve as a blueprint for the entire country when it comes to holding elections, especially during the time of a pandemic. And now here we are in May of 2021, and he's like, I just gave you the greatest election security we've ever seen. We have election integrity. The problem is you can't have it both ways. Did the Republicans commit fraud to win the election in 2020, Or did they not and nothing was wrong and they're breaking the system in order to fix it, which could in fact come back to haunt them since they usually win on elections by vote by mail?
And in fact, Republicans were the ones who for decades pushed vote by mail in Florida. Let's turn to another topic. Charlie Crist, a familiar face, congressman in St. Petersburg, Mariana, tossing his hat into the Democratic ring for governor. And I think we have some footage of Mr. Crist. And not yet, Nikki Fried, Agriculture Commissioner, and Congresswoman Val Demings, they've not announced, but there's a lot of talk, will they jump in? But to Charlie getting in the race.
You know, I'll tell you what, nothing I love like a good Charlie Crist gubernatorial run. We saw him run in 2014 and he lost by a very narrow margin. And it'll be interesting to see if he's able to bring home that win for the Democrats in 2021 or 2022, excuse me.
It seems in 2021 with a party that's really promoting diversity, Charlie Crist facing potentially a Nikki Fried, a Val Demings, tough hill to climb, and already the criticism about the fact Charlie Crist, some take on the variation of this theme, Brian, that he's a political weather vane, a Republican independent, now a Democrat. Talk about challenges ahead and the other potential candidates who might try to square off for the chance to face Ron DeSantis.
Well, I covered many of Charlie Crist races, and nobody loves to campaign more than Charlie Crist. I heard him described the other day as Joe Biden-like, which I found interesting because in some ways he is Joe Biden-like. Those who are dismissing him as just a guy past his prime who's running for office and should step aside are saying, well, all the same things were said about Joe Biden. So it's an interesting analogy there. But I think that, should the Florida Democratic Party start making some room for the up and comers in the party, for the Val Demings, Nikki Frieds and some others, they should do it. And it's going to be a very interesting Democratic primary if all three of them wind up in the race.
10 seconds in this segment. Last thought, Mariana, briefly.
I would agree with Brian. It's going to be really interesting in the Democratic primary, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see who's going to end up going against Governor DeSantis for his reelection and how that's going to position itself, if he will be against a woman, if he'll be against Charlie Crist. It's really going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, and I'll tell you what, I'm keeping my pulse on the finger for this.
And we will keep our pulse on your closing comments in just a moment.